Don't force anything. Let reality reveal the way. Most people spend their lives trying to force reality to match their expectations. They force relationships. They force careers. They force themselves to become someone else. And after years of effort, many arrive at the same quiet conclusion. Life feels exhausting. What is strange is that we rarely question the assumption underneath all this effort. We assume that if something matters, pushing harder must be the answer. If a relationship is struggling, try harder. If the future feels uncertain, plan harder. If the mind is restless, work harder to calm it. And yet something doesn't quite fit. Because there are moments when the external problem disappears, but the tension remains. The job changes. The relationship improves. And still, something inside continues straining toward a different moment than the one that is actually here. There is something here that many people spend an entire lifetime overlooking. The exhaustion is not always coming from what life is asking of us. Sometimes it comes from what we are asking of life. As you listen, notice whether this pattern feels familiar somewhere in your own experience. There is a strange habit in the human mind. The moment something appears, the mind immediately begins negotiating with it. This should stay. That should go. This should have happened sooner. That should never have happened at all. The negotiation never ends. What we call stress, what we call frustration, what we call disappointment, is often this same negotiation wearing a different name. Not because wanting is wrong, not because caring is wrong, but because reality keeps moving according to its own conditions. And the mind keeps insisting that it should move according to ours. There is something that happens just after a difficult conversation ends. Not during it, after. The words have already been spoken. Nothing more can be added. Nothing can be taken back. And yet the conversation continues inside the mind for hours, sometimes for days. The body has already left the room. The chair is empty. The air has settled. But something else refuses to leave. A person replays every sentence. What should have been said? What should not have been said? Notice what is happening. The suffering is no longer coming from the conversation itself. The conversation is over. The suffering is coming from the struggle against the fact that it already happened. Most people know this friction well. They simply call it exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying reality instead of meeting it. Most of us have spent years believing that freedom means finally arranging life exactly the way we want it. Before we go further, notice honestly whether this pattern has shown up somewhere in your own life. But if that were true, then every fulfilled desire would bring lasting peace. An experience suggests otherwise. A desire is fulfilled. For a moment, there is relief. Then another desire appears. The cycle begins again. There is something that happens so quietly that many people never notice it. The moment reality differs from expectation, a second experience is created. The first experience is what actually happened. The second experience is the mind's resistance to what happened. The second experience is usually the heavier one. A man we will simply call the patient sat in a small clinic room, waiting for results he had already half expected. The doctor's voice was calm, measured. The kind of voice trained to deliver difficult news gently. A diagnosis, not the worst possible one, but not a small one either. Something that would require treatment, time, uncertainty. The first thing that happened was simple. The body absorbed the words. A tightness in the chest. A held breath. That was the illness, arriving as information. That part was real, and there was nothing to do but feel it. But then, almost immediately, something else began. This should not be happening to me, not now. Not after everything I've already been through. Why me and not someone else? My body was supposed to be different. My life was supposed to go a different way. By the time he left the clinic, he was no longer only carrying a diagnosis. He was carrying an argument. An argument with a body that had already changed. An argument with a future that had already shifted. An argument that could not be won, because the thing it was arguing against had already happened. The illness remained one thing. The resistance became many things: fear, anger. Quiet rehearsals of a different outcome that was never going to arrive. This does not mean we stop caring or stop seeking treatment or stop acting wisely. It means something more subtle. Reality and resistance are not the same thing. And because they are not the same thing, one can begin to see them separately. That separation changes everything. Because the mind often believes the solution is more effort, more control. But there are certain things in life that never become clearer through force. Understanding is one of them. Peace is one of them. And perhaps most surprisingly, truth is one of them. The harder we try to force reality into the shape we prefer, the harder it becomes to see what is actually here. Long before awakening, Siddhartha believed something that most of us still believe. If something is important enough, greater effort must be the answer. So he gave himself completely to effort. Not ordinary effort. Extreme effort. He left behind comfort, status, everything familiar. Historical accounts describe years of severe austerity. Eating almost nothing. Driving the body to its limits. Reducing life to a single purpose. Awakening. If effort alone could have opened the door, few human beings were more qualified than he was. Yet the harder he pushed, the further the goal seemed to recede. Not because he lacked sincerity. Not because he lacked discipline. The problem was somewhere else. There is a moment in every human life when effort quietly changes shape. At first, effort serves a purpose. Then, without noticing, the purpose begins serving the effort. The struggle becomes more important than understanding. One day, sitting beneath a tree, something shifted. Not through a new technique. Not through one final heroic act of will. Something was abandoned. The struggle itself. The attempt to force reality into a particular outcome. Only then did clear seeing become possible. This story is often misunderstood. Many hear it and conclude the lesson is simply to relax or to stop trying. But that misses something important. Some hear it and conclude that acceptance means becoming passive. That if we stop forcing, we stop caring. Neither view reaches the heart of the matter. Most people spend years trying to control reality. Eventually, they become exhausted. Then they discover teachings about surrender. And immediately, they turn surrender into another strategy. Another project to achieve. Now they are trying very hard to let go. Trying very hard to be peaceful. The old struggle has simply changed clothes. A different label. The same movement underneath. Because reality is not an achievement. Reality is already here. There may be something in your own life that fits exactly here. Notice what it is. A Vietnamese meditation master, Venerable Vien Minh, once described this as seeing clearly is not something added to experience. It is what remains when unnecessary interference falls away. This sounds simple, yet it touches something very deep. Because most of us are not only trying to control life, we are trying to control ourselves. We are trying to become a calmer version, a wiser version. And in that trying, the self-project continues, just wearing different clothing. The one who wants to be calmer is still the one running the show. Without realizing it, suffering finds a place to hide. Not in failure, not in success, but in the constant effort to become someone else. But look carefully. Life may not be what is heavy. The resistance is heavy. The insistence that this moment should be different, that is heavy. Reality itself is surprisingly light. A sound appears, then disappears. A thought appears, then disappears. The burden is rarely in the experience itself. The burden is in the holding, in the grasping. And no battle is more exhausting than a battle against reality. This is where the title of this reflection begins to reveal its meaning. Don't force anything. Not because effort is bad, not because action is unnecessary, but because forcing creates distortion, and distortion prevents clear seeing. There is something very small that reveals this entire teaching. It appears in an ordinary moment, not during meditation, just in the middle of an ordinary day. Someone receives an email they did not want to receive. The body tightens. Shoulders rise slightly. A breath catches. A thought appears. This is bad. Almost immediately, another thought rushes in. What should I do? How do I fix this? Yet there is a tiny moment before all of that. A moment so brief it is usually missed entirely. The email appears. The reaction appears. And for an instant, reality is simply being known. Nothing has been added yet. Nothing has been resisted yet. Most of us have learned to look away from this gap. See if it happens right now, even as you listen. The next time frustration appears, notice the first few seconds. Not to change them. Just notice. A feeling appears. A thought appears. Before the story begins. Before the argument begins. Life is already happening. This is not a technique. It is simply a place to stand. A place from which reality can finally be seen, without immediately being negotiated with. A person may still face illness. Loss may still arrive. The body may still age. Life does not suddenly become easy. The Dharma never promised that. What changes is something quieter. The extra layer begins to loosen. The layer that says, this should not be happening. I cannot be at peace until reality changes. And when that layer loosens, even slightly, a different possibility appears. Not because suffering has vanished, but because the struggle against suffering is no longer consuming all of our energy. The Buddha spent years searching for freedom. In the end, what he discovered was not another object to acquire. He discovered something that had been present all along. Reality seen clearly, without adding, without subtracting, That is why the deepest wisdom often sounds surprisingly simple. When you look, just look. When you listen, just listen. When sadness appears, no sadness. Let each experience be exactly what it is, before the mind turns it into something it is not. Reality does not need our management nearly as much as we imagine. Most of the time, it is already carrying itself. Not the freedom of getting everything we want. The freedom of no longer needing reality to obey us before we can meet it. The way was never hidden. It was never reserved for extraordinary people. What obscured it was the constant attempt to force experience into a different shape. And when that forcing begins to soften, even for a moment, reality reveals something it has been showing all along. Nothing extra was needed. Nothing was missing. If this kind of seeing is something you want to keep returning to, subscribe, and we'll keep going.